right there. You turn south and come down to the park down there. What's the name of that? It starts at both of them start at one starts at the sewer plant. Fayetteville starts at the sewer plant, and the other one starts at the old Kansas store. The old Water Creek store. Yes. Well, I sat on the city council in the city of Lincoln for 6 years, and that city treatment plant ran out of compliance for 6 years. The state of Arkansas issued this permit, and they should have never done it. They should have never allowed them to do it.
Yeah, we have great interest. Jump, run. I got you. Yes, and I
Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Jail and Law Enforcement Courts Committee meeting. I'd like to call it to order. We've got a lot of reports tonight. We don't have any action that I'm aware of to take. It's getting late. I don't have anywhere to be until 5:30 in the morning, but I'd ask everybody to talk fast and listen fast, and if you've given us a report in writing, give us the high points, please.
I'd like to make a motion to accept the agenda.
Got a motion and a second to accept the agenda. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item number 3, juvenile detention report. Do we have anybody giving the report tonight? I think we only have a written report. Does anybody? Let's go.
Hello. I've just come to introduce myself.
Ma'am, sit down and talk, speak in the microphone, please.
Hello, I just come to introduce myself. My name is Denise Collins. I'm the new director at Washington County Juvenile Detention Center. Thank you. And I'm going to allow Kendrick Sexton to give the report.
Very good. Thank you.
Hello, it's been a while since I've been up here. Thank you. And I'm Kendrick Sexton, Assistant Director at the Juvenile Detention Facility. And for our report for October, we started off at above capacity for a little bit, so we were still we were housing one resident at the Benton County Juvenile Facility. But as you can see in the numbers, that we went down during the month. So we're no longer at capacity. So we have enough beds for everyone. We won't have to pay any other counties right now. Looking at statistics from this time frame of last year, surprisingly, even with our high numbers, it's actually down from the same point that we was last year on the report. Our transports from this month for October is identical to what we had last month. It was 19. Our facility did 17 of them, our department, and the sheriff department did 2 of those transports.
Are there any questions? Thank you, sir.
All right, thank y'all.
Next, we have the Enforcement Activity Report. Chief Deputy Jay Cantrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Enforcement report, nothing big to report. Cost for services are up just a tick, but nothing that we're concerned about at this point. You know, animal calls are something we kind of watch, and they're up a little bit, but so far we're able to keep up with those. So nothing out of the ordinary on the enforcement side. And Major Denzer is out, so when you're ready, I'll be giving the jail report too.
Okay. Any questions? Go ahead.
On the detention side, you can see we sent it the printed report. Intakes are down just a tick, but board days are up a little, so we can correlate that to people that are coming in and staying just a little longer. We have seen some success with the Bell Project. I think they've gotten released 81, according to our numbers that they've gotten out. Mr. Edelman will give his report. He's been able to do some stuff to help out a little bit, so we're just moving along, trying to keep our head above water. Have about 90 on the floor today.
Justice Harbison?
What was our pretrial count today?
Let me look. I have that. 359 today.
359, so
Yes.
we're down almost from 400.
Yes.
So we're beginning to see a little bit of,
Yeah. See a little trend there.
Shrinkage there.
See a little trend. We hope it continues.
okay.
Any other questions? Justice Deakins?
Couple quick questions on this report, detention board days. I'm looking down on the federal prisoners line item, and I'm finally getting my head wrapped around this report after being on this
Okay.
board about a year. You know, I'm looking over from the years comparison, 2019 to 2018. There is quite the uptick in those federal board days,
Yes.
from 15,000 to 20,000. Do you have any commentary on what drives that? Is that cyclical? What are we facing here?
We see an uptick whenever they impanel a new grand jury. The federal court, keep in mind, almost all these federal prisoners are local prisoners. They house them here to serve the courts easier.
Sure.
So they're all have committed crimes within our region. Most all of them, probably I'd say almost all of them, and maybe all of them. So they have they impanel a grand jury. The indictments are a little more forthcoming, and then I think those run for 90 days as the grand jury kind of moves along to the end of their term, then the indictments are a little less. But you know, the federal enforcement agencies, you know, we've got HSI and DEA, and those guys are out. They're doing a lot of work too. So, and we've noticed that the federal prosecutors are picking up more of the local cases. Now, Matt might be able to comment more on that, but some of these violent crimes or gang-related crimes, the federal prosecutors picking those up because they have a stiffer sentence and less chance to make parole quickly. So they're picking up some of those cases. So I think that's probably attributes to a lot of our increase.
Gotcha.
Is they're picking up more of the cases.
Because that's a spike of like 30%. That's
Right.
pretty high. It seems, I guess what I'm saying is when I'm mapping out these other comparisons between years, that one really spikes out to me. Do you know how many federal detainees we have currently in the jail?
Yes, I do. Federal prisoners, 81.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I realize I'm not on this committee, so I appreciate you giving me the time. Just curious about one detail here. On the county commits, it shows October 2018, 324, October 2019, 1,312.
Yeah, I noticed that anomaly too, but I didn't notice it until this afternoon. I didn't have time to really look into that and see what
Kinda just jumped out at
what
me.
drove that number. So I don't have a
Don't have
very
an
clear
answer.
answer for that tonight. I'm sorry. But I can get that information.
If you wouldn't mind, and maybe
Yeah.
emailing?
Sure. Yeah, I'll email
Could you
it to
explain
everyone.
exactly what the county commit is? What is that?
Well, those are people that are sentenced in either district court or circuit court to a term in the county jail. So they're not sentenced to the federal or to the state prison. They've got a term of less than a year. Could be for domestic battery or theft of property or any kind of crime, whether felony or misdemeanor, that they got less than a year to do, and they can do that time in the county jail. And we try to move those people through and get them onto our work release, our community service program, or get them in trustee status so they can get a 2-for-1 credit and get them out quicker. So we have more opportunities. We can work with those people.
Justice Yanis.
Thank you. Do the ICE hold fall under federal prisoners?
Correct, they do.
Okay, thank you.
Justice Harbison.
Okay, those people that are sentenced by judges to less than a year that are in the county jail, does the state pay for those, or do we pay for those?
So those are the county's responsibility.
So we pay okay. How many of those do we have?
Well, circuit court commits, today, we've got 10 that are committed out of circuit court, so those would have been felons. They got some term less than a year, likely got a 90-day or 180-day sentence, or maybe even a year sentence, and then some probation to go with that. And then district court commits, we've got 21 of those. That's a pretty fluid number because they could get committed. We might have 3 that went to court today in Fayetteville District Court and get committed to 3 days in jail, and then they'll do their day and a half or whatever they make trustee and move on out, and then some more will take their place. So that number is kind of fluid. It moves a lot.
Do we have an average number for those?
On the district
Somewhere.
court commitments, no, we
District,
don't have
yeah.
an average.
Per month?
No, not per month.
Okay.
I can probably pull that up
Well, let's-
and compile those numbers, but I don't have them in front of me today.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Alderman. Edelman. Let me slow down.
And I didn't go to med school.
Okay.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I will take my cue from you, Mr. Chairman, and be as brief as I can because my report pretty much speaks for itself, and we've tried to do some of the ups and downs, and I'd say there are more ups and downs. Between ourselves and the bail project, we have been making progress on getting those population numbers down. I have to say that most of those numbers are the bail project and not us, because they've got money and we don't. So we don't have any powers to get people out other than power of persuasion, talking to the prosecutors, and talking to the judges, and we've been making progress. I'm very pleased. If you want to just get a couple of highlights, sir, is that just this past week, we've gotten now our first person out on electronic monitoring. The court has approved a release, and that's something that I've highlighted in my report, and hope that in the future that won't be news anymore. That'll be a regular routine proceeding. As I mentioned previously, we've had quite a volume of requests to see us. We have brought on a 3rd law student from the University of Arkansas, pro bono student, so our numbers are up. We will be able to do more in terms of interviewing, in terms of follow-up, hopefully in terms of additional release. We are looking, since if you look at the calendar, Thanksgiving is coming up, Christmas is coming up, we are looking to put on a push over November and December to get as many people reasonably and safely home to to their families as we possibly can. And just again, the cooperation we have, official and not official. Officially, I sat down with Prosecutor Durrett and his staff last week. Some of the cases are kind of easy to move. The fixes are easy. Some of them I called last time stuck cases. I'll probably have more to say about them at another time, but some of those just are real resistant with the existence of other holds and previous FTAs. We are working on that. And we also have, I would say, a very good, for want of a better word, synergy with the bail project. We're able to refer people to them and maybe get a bond reduced to a manageable amount that the bail project can then actually post for that detainee's release. And their statistics, not only the raw numbers are terrific, but also their appearance rates are terrific in terms of low FTAs from the people that come out under their auspices, both here and around the country. So basically, my report for you is optimistic. I'll be happy to answer any questions. I ought to say one other thing. Since the full quorum court initially approved an appropriation of $15,000, I would say roughly at this point, we're about a third of the way into that. So I'd say maybe early 2020, maybe February, and best guess might be a time for us all to maybe sort of reassess how the Ombudsman project is going and whether to extend it. Those are things we can maybe take up another time. I'd be happy to answer any questions the JPs might have.
Justice Deakins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I found this report interesting this time. I feel like you took a lot more of a narrative approach here. I got a couple things I want to ask you about.
Sure. Just as a preface, I would say I was able to do that this month because now we've got a couple of months' experience under our belts, so we can just we can talk from some practical cases, some real cases that we've dealt with.
Gotcha. I numbered these bullet points underneath successes and challenges. So over here on number 2, it'll be the top of page 2, that last sentence. You stated here, as a certain point, our capacity to tax and spend to build and operate more and more jails and prisons becomes exhausted.
Yes, that's a typo. It should be at, not as a
Gotcha.
certain point. You caught that.
I wouldn't
and
dare
that-
take the liberty to correct your
Okay,
expertise.
I appreciate the typo correction, but as an observation, that's true here, that's true throughout the state, that's true throughout the country in terms of being able to tax and build more and more jails, more and more prisons. They are necessary, but again, the capacity is finite.
I'm going to move on down to the bottom of page 2 and moving on to page 3. You talk a lot about, well, you talk some about prioritizing and processing the disposition of jail cases.
Yes.
And one of these, what you're saying is, it ought to be prioritized within our justice system to prioritize jail cases, those offenses that would require jail time.
Not quite. I hope I wasn't unclear about that. What I was talking about is prioritizing the cases of persons who are in jail. In other words, the persons who are detained either on high bail or no bail, no bond. Those are the cases that the system, our preliminary recommendation is that those should be the ones that are administratively prioritized. Put the jail cases, persons who are in jail, at the top of the list, whether they're ultimately acquitted or ultimately convicted, but get those cases through the system, again, as a way of minimizing, of cutting down on the overall amount of pretrial detention.
So clarify for our group, that decision would be between the prosecutors, the public defender, and the judge overseeing the case, right? I mean, that would be something that they need to kind of coordinate on?
Yes, and as a practical matter, I think that would be a matter of policy, a matter of priority that the courts, that primarily the courts would set. They control their own dockets, so they control the scheduling of cases. What triggers that comment, sir, is the number of cases we've seen where people are on high bond and then not going to court until February, and that's 3 months just of dead time. I think, again, without any cost, prioritizing those cases, innocent, guilty, whether they're going to jail or probation, whatever the disposition is, putting those cases at the top of the list, those persons who are in fact confined in the detention center.
Finally, one of the major decisions we're being asked about now is additional funding and staffing for both our prosecutor's office and our public defender's office. And I think the hope there is that we could speed this criminal justice process along a little more and maybe relieve some of those pretrial detainees. So I don't know if you have any commentary yet, or if it would be appropriate for you to comment. On your observations, are we understaffed in the justice system? Is that why these cases are sitting?
That, sir, respectfully, is outside of my lane. Really, I'm not in a position to speak. Now, I know other people are, but that's not something I'm in a position to speak knowledgeably to.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Justice Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that you are dealing with only pretrial people, but given your experience with our jail thus far, do you have any kind of feel whether the people that are there post-trial but not awaiting transfer to the state may have what might be considered excessive sentences compared to other jurisdictions? I know you work in Oklahoma
Yeah.
that just recently released or commuted sentences for a chunk of folks.
Today's a big day in Oklahoma there, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And good for their jails.
yeah.
Do we have any issues with unreasonable sentences, perhaps?
I can only kind of give you sort of an impression, not based on data. I haven't had a chance to review that. My own sense is that the actual average length of sentence isn't that high, but the actual incarceration rate is per capita population is high. And whether that can be traced to criminal justice policies or not is, again, something I haven't had a chance to look at. But we do, in this county, in this state, in this country, have enormous incarceration rates relative to the rest of the world.
Well, I think we all know that, but I'm trying to figure out, compared to surrounding states, if our sentences are maybe stuck in a different time period.
I'm sure there are people who know how to research that. It's something I haven't gotten to.
Not your turn to do that
Yeah.
yet.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Justice Bowman.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The guy that's released with the electronic monitoring, is he paying for that monitoring, or is it the county?
I do not know the answer. Would Sheriff Elder know that, or Mr.
Should be
Derrick?
passed on to the person that's wearing the ankle monitor. Do you know?
Who's paying the bill is the question.
Stan, I'm unaware of that situation, but by and large, we don't have a budget to pay for it. So the board
Yeah.
would have passed it on to the individual.
Okay, so the individual, what's the daily cost for that monitor?
The only information I have is that this gentleman was released with a electronic monitoring bracelet,
Okay.
and that, beyond that, I'm not knowledgeable.
Thank you.
But I would, again, like to see that a more routine matter in terms of that could be a whole lot less expensive than keeping a lot more people in jail for a longer time.
I would love that if the prisoners are paying for the monitoring.
Other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Item 6, the Washington County Criminal Justice Work Group Report. Sheriff Helder.
I'm going to bail Sarah out this time. We kind of hung her out to dry last month. And Willie, he was at this one. I'll bail him out. I met today with our chairperson, Monique Jones, and she was only able to be here for a brief time earlier, and I told her that I would deliver this, and I will from now on. For those of you that don't know, I know that the folks that are on our committee know that we formulated a work group for the sheriff's office to kind of identify some areas that we're dealing with, overcrowding obviously, but maybe some other things within our realm of the criminal justice system to give us some ideas that we may not be thinking of. At our last meeting on the 18th, the first item of business was a jail report, and then we discussed immediate needs, near future needs, which might be a 1 to 2 to 3 year gap, and then distant future needs, which would be 5 to 10 years into the future. There was also a conversation with a representative from the Springdale Police Department about the impending closure of their facility and what that might look like. I know Chief Peters was not there. He has since provided some numbers to Monique that will be shared at the next meeting. But I think that this was discussed at any rate, that they're looking at best-case scenario, when they do shut down, that we'll be impacted by about 1,500 Class A misdemeanors, people that they cannot cite out, that will have to come to jail for processing. Monique also has a desire to set up subcommittees dealing with pretrial to talk about charge type and population, case processing, and then also about facilities. And they'll be given monthly jail reports, and then they'll be given the ombudsman's report, status on jail assessments, things of that nature, reports on the bail project, impact of the crisis stabilization unit, and then our staffing, retention, and programs we have going on within the jail. What I met with the chairperson today about was that I think they got to an impasse maybe at the last meeting, wanting to know who are they supposed to report to? And I felt like I had made that clear. This was through Sterling Penix and Jail Standards who made this recommendation, that this was our work group, the Sheriff's Office work group, to specifically address this detention issue just as an advisory committee to me. And so they're wondering who they report to, and I'll just tell you, that's me. And then I will then report to you as my committee to let you know what's going on and what the input is from this work group. Also, to identify overall goals of the committee. And she asked me specifically, what is it you want to see come out of this? And I said, well, by virtue of the way the dynamics of the committee, I don't have all Republicans or all Democrats. I don't have all cops. I've got a variety of people. Somebody from the Catholic Church is represented, a school teacher, law enforcement, big agencies, small agencies. We have a very diverse group, and that was by design. It wasn't necessarily a recommendation. Generally, when Sterling said they put these groups together, it's to get like-minded people so you can get a project through. I felt like that would be disingenuous with you and with the citizens of Washington County, so I wanted to bring together a group that would have to work together and maybe come up with some compromise in the mix, to recognize that we have an overcrowding situation, but also look at a variety of ways of accomplishing the end goal. When she asked me what my desire was, obviously my initial presentation was an expansion. I haven't backed up from that, but I'm willing to listen and to hear what everybody wants to do. And I discussed with Monique that what I'd hoped would come out of this work group is maybe that compromise where they look at an interim or a short-term fix, an idea of how do we get there, i.e., is it an expansion of our intake area? Is it the completion or at least moving forward on a minimum security building to get us over the hump with Springdale and everything that's going on? And then long-term, let's talk about what should we be looking at with a long-term expansion when it does come, because it will come. But in my mind, it's not just about putting beds in place. Why don't we go ahead and work on, if we're able long-term to get this established, work with our reentry gentlemen in Springdale, work with mental health, and work with a detox center, things of that nature that we could do when we do the overall expansion, but that's the long-term, okay? So we clearly identified that today as we sat down, and then she did want to clarify that the reports would come to me and I would then give them to you, and that their voices would not be, sometimes how I feel, a voice in the wilderness, but are people going to listen? And I assured her that I was listening and that you would as well. Okay? So that's a report from our work group, and they are busy. They'll meet again Friday at the Sheriff's Office. They meet from noon to 1 if anybody would like to attend. Chairman, are you going to be there this week? Sorry, Lance, didn't mean to put you on the spot.
You did. When we've heard about the Springdale closure for 9, 10, 11 months, is
Yes,
there
sir.
a date?
The last I heard, and I talked to actually J.P. Harbison, and I hope this is okay with you for me to say this, but she said, I'm going to ask you to do something that may be awkward. And I said, what is it, Ann? would you talk to the chief at Springdale and ask if they can put off their closing until later in the year? And I did that, Ann. But the answer was very adamantly no. As soon as he can close the doors, he's going to do it. And right now, that looks like it could be as soon as the first of the year.
First of the year. Any other questions? Justice Yanis.
Thank you. Just trying to get some demographics of the group.
Yes.
How many male on the group?
How many males in the group? I may have to get with Jay. He's got the list of the members.
Of the people?
Yeah, the demographics of the group, yeah.
So here's the breakdown of what
Okay.
it is. So it's, you've got the prosecutor's office represented, so it may be Matt or it may be somebody maybe Tara that would come. We've got the circuit judges are represented, that's Judge Lindsay. We've got the public defender, that's Denny, or whoever he sends. It could be male or female.
So it's
I
not
guess
the
is
same
what
person every time?
No, our chairman is on there, but if he's not there, he asks somebody else on committee to go. Willie Lemming came last time. It may be you at some point that's asked to attend.
Okay.
Sarah Moore is on board. Monique is there. The police departments, of course, could be represented, but it's chiefs, from Springdale, Fayetteville, Elkins. Jay, what am I missing? Okay. I apologize. Good question.
No, when things are made intentional, it's like a quick.
So, county judge, district judge Jeff Harper from Springdale, Mark Lindsay, Circuit Court, Mike Reynolds, Mike Peters, Brian Watts, chiefs of police. Mike Parker, probation and parole, or whoever he designates to come.
These are all males, right?
So far.
Okay.
Yes. Well, they're basically assigned, these people are, because they're heads of their agencies. Does that make sense?
It does.
I could care less if it's male or female. It's fine with me.
Well, for like the diversity of a group,
Yes.
you want to have diverse voices.
Well,
or-
yes, ma'am, yes.
Okay.
Just so you know, our chairperson is female. So, and then by virtue of his chairmanship of my committee, Lance is on. The mayor of Springdale, Doug Sprouse. Eddie Cantu's a pastor in Springdale. Charlie Rossetti, retired school teacher. Chamber of Commerce from Springdale, Perry Webb. College student, Lexi Robertson, female. Sarah Moore, citizen at large. Nancy Kahanik, mental health representative. And Monique Jones, NAACP.
Okay.
So, that's it. That's the breakdown.
Okay, and then so diversity race, that would be primarily white. I think I might have counted.
Monique is African American.
And Eddie Cantu.
Eddie Cantu, Hispanic. Yeah, I think that's it. And depending on the assigned person that might come in. Yes, ma'am.
I might show up to add some diversity.
We'd welcome you to come.
Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions? Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Item 7 on the agenda is the lease agreement on county buildings at 100 and 114 North College Avenue. Justice Deakins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I brought this up tonight and added it to be added as a discussion item because I wanted to share this with my colleagues on the committee. If you will, there is the copy of the lease in the packet, and I'm going to reference some things in this. For many of you, this address is abstract, but for a lot of us, we know this is the old jail that is currently being leased to the Arkansas Department of Community Correction, and I believe they're operating it as a women's prison for the state. And I asked County Attorney Lester to pull this lease for me, and when I reviewed it, keeping in mind that I am not an attorney, this is just a layman's review, I want to show everybody down there in item number 2, the term. This is a 20-year lease commencing on July 1st, 2007 and ending June 30th of 2027. The rent for this building is $1 per calendar year, which seems to be quite common in a lot of our leases. So basically, from what I could tell, we have leased this building out, and the leasee is completely responsible for all the repairs and maintenance. But if you'll flip over to page 3 of the lease agreement, what I found interesting, item number 9, termination, and I'll read here if you will humor me. After the premises has been occupied by the lessee for at least 10 years, the lessor may terminate this lease upon 9 months' written notice to the lessee through ABA. And such lessor shall reimburse the lessee the costs incurred in making improvements to and modification of the premises. If the lessee desires to leave any certain improvements, modifications in the premises, and lessor agrees to accept, then the lessor will pay the lessee the depreciated value of the remaining improvements. And then finally, in the very last line item there, you'll see that there is a $5,000 fee for the early termination of this lease. While I thought this was all very interesting to this county as a board, is because I'm wondering, as we continue to find solutions to our jail problem, is this county asset being underutilized? And the reason I brought it to this group is it looks like if we were interested in reclaiming this asset, it would take maybe some sort of funds to do that. And so I want everyone to please consider that as we work towards this jail problem, the many issues that we have along with that. And I just feel a responsibility to bring this to my colleagues' attention so that we can continue to assess this in the grander scheme of things. Now, we walk, of course, a fine line because we know contracting buildings and things like that is normally under the judge's, absolutely underneath the judge's purview. And so I've asked Counselor Lester just to help me out with this, but this is something that we would want to work with the judge on. So I appreciate it and appreciate any discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any comments? Justice Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for doing this research. And it strikes me as a little bit lopsided that we're giving the state such a good deal when they don't pay their bills. That's all I have to say.
Any other comments? Justice Yanez.
What's the history of the $1 rent a month? Okay.
The only conclusion I can come to is it may have made sense in 2007.
Just a couple additions. I asked County Attorney Lester if he had any idea what those improvement costs might be. I believe he's reached out to the department at the state and has requested that. I believe that's pending. We haven't received a response yet. And then also I have put it maybe on my calendar to maybe request that maybe Dwight Gonzalez with Building and Grounds go down and just tour that building and see if he has an idea of what maintenance would be for the county, or put together any kind of a thought that he might have on it, since it's a county asset. So just to add those additions.
I have reached out to the Department of Community Corrections, and as you can imagine, caused a little bit of panic in Little Rock. I did talk to the director and assured him and assured their legal counsel in writing that we were not, in fact, giving them 9 months' notice. We were only inquiring as to the option, what it would look like given our issues. They do keep up with the fact and are well aware of the fact that we have an overcrowding problem in our jail. The director informed me that he tries to get Washington County's women out, released as quickly as possible, and so that he can get more in from the jail to kind of help with that overcrowding. But yes, they were quite panicked. I don't know why we have given away all of our property for $1 a year, or why we didn't have clauses that prohibited the people that we rent to from subleasing. UAMS charges the federal government $500,000 a year to rent one floor of the UAMS building. They've been charging Welcome Health around $200,000 a year for a building that Welcome Health went in and spent almost $1 million in to do. We've helped work on that one a little bit. As you can imagine, the university does not feel that state law really applies to them and we have any option, but I won't get into that now. So I will tell you that we, as in Judge Wood's administration, have leased property, and I can guarantee you, and you're welcome to look at it, absolutely none of it has been for $1 a year and will not be, because we do have a lot of valuable property that we are trying to recoup some of our costs on.
Justice Madison.
Since the lease that we're looking at has an early termination provision, I'm curious if any of the other contracts have similar.
No. And there is a state law that says in the event that the county needs property back, or is the property is no longer used for that which it was leased, that we can terminate. I've had numerous conversations with general counsel from the university who says that they are the state of Arkansas and those provisions do not apply to them.
Can we sue them for unjust enrichment?
I don't think so, because we didn't have any kind of clause that said they couldn't lease that out. I mean, it's been silent to that. I'm negotiating with the state on a lease right now, and I've had to go in and say, we're not going to agree to this, because all of their leases are one-sided. They say, we as the state can terminate this at any time, regardless. You cannot terminate this at all. If you do, you've got to pay us money. And I've informed them that we would not be signing a lease with them if those were the conditions, because we would not go forward with that. That's what we've done in the past. They said that, well, this is a state form, and that's what they put in all their leases. And I said, well, that's fine. We have non-state people that are interested in leasing our buildings, and we'll be happy to lease to them on a lease that's not one-sided. So.
Wow, okay.
Other comments? Justice Duncan.
I'm just curious, what are next steps? I mean, we can either renegotiate with them to have a fair lease, or we can terminate, right? And we have to wait the 9 months and pay the fees. I mean, and I guess that's a judge's call, right? That's not, like, the court doesn't make that decision.
Well, the only thing that would not just be the judge's call, because like J.P. Deacon said, it would cost money, and so you would have to appropriate money with that. And so I don't know. I know that the Department of Community Corrections really does need that space. So I won't really go into what we could do. I mean, there's an option to go in and say, hey, we can terminate this and pay you, and you guys can find somewhere else to go, and we'll use this, or try to negotiate something where they are at least paying something until the end of that lease. And there's several options there.
Justice Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one little question here. This was formerly a county jail. By today's standards, how jail-worthy is it as far as security and?
It has to meet the same jail standards that our county jail does, because it's the state still housing inmates. So
community punishment is a lower level than the state prison.
Right. I don't believe it's like a supermax, but that may be a better question for the sheriff. I don't know what all the different jail standards are. I know that they have to comply with state and federal law as well.
Okay, but it could definitely still be used for some form of incarceration. Okay, thank you.
Arguably so.
Other comments? Justice Duncan.
So should we move this to Budget and Finance? Is that the proper motion to, like, I guess there's nothing, I'm just trying to figure out how do we get the ball rolling to actually explore this? I know Patrick brought this up for a reason, but.
Justice Deakins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I want us to be very diligent about this, and I want us to be very investigative about this. I would like to see what the department responds to Counselor Lester's letter. Counselor Lester, I would try to implore you to get that response, not let that languish. I think after getting that response, we would have a lot more information to what our next step might be. So I might caution the group to wait for that particular milestone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Chairman. Justice Leming.
Figure out how to get this on. Turn it on for me, boss. Tim, how many people would you need to take care of this jail if we had it up here? I mean, you got to add people if we're going to have another jail there. I mean, that's a good question, I think.
It's a great question. I just don't know if I'm prepared to answer it. So, you know that
I can answer a couple of the questions maybe, but to your question first, on the standards, they took all the doors off in there, all of the hard doors. It's like an open, it's about rehab and it's about reentry and those things. So it would take a lot of work to get it back up to speed. Now, whether it meets standards, it would just take a lot of investment to get it there. As far as personnel, so if we had 240, there were 240 beds in there before. Of course, only 12 of them were designated for females at the time. So our staffing was a little different. So, and it's not built like the current facility to where we can have fewer people watching more people. It's almost hands-on in that building, the way it's designed. So it would be manpower intensive. To give you a number, I'd have to do some study, Willie, to get you that. But it would be manpower intensive. Then you got to figure meals. We'd have to redo the contract there. Medical. We'd have to have a whole nother medical staff there. I just don't have those numbers in front of me. I'm sorry.
But I know we're trying to get it back, and I don't know feasibility, if it would be feasible to put it there.
It would be an option. I think that's what he's throwing out. But I think probably bigger issues, Willie, might be, does it serve the greater good? And I think that when you go back to the dollar lease back then, the building was going to set. It really wasn't designed for anything other than what it was. And at some point, Judge Hunton entered into this conversation just about them occupying it to keep it from rotting down. And it was serving that part of society that they couldn't fulfill anywhere in the state. To me, I think that's why it was $1. It was just like, look, you're keeping it occupied and you're serving a good community deal. But to me, the way it needs probably to be explored first would be a renegotiation with them, because I think they do a great service, and they don't, there's only 2 in the state. I think one's, is it in West Memphis? I can't remember. Newport, somewhere. But at any rate, it's an option. I mean,
would it be safe to say the females is there are basically from Washington County in this area?
A lot of them are, but not all of them.
Okay.
But they try to move in people from Washington, Benton County, our region, into that area.
We're still going to have them folks one way or another, probably.
Well, to an extent, yes. Yeah, I don't disagree. But
Stay there.
Okay.
Other questions?
Thank you.
Let's see what Mr. Lester comes up with from the state, and we'll discuss this in a month again. Item 8 is a presentation by Sheriff Helder.
I think presentation's a big word. I didn't put that on there. That was the chairman presentation, but a discussion perhaps. So kind of to dovetail on to what Chairperson Jones and I discussed earlier, and then has been an ongoing conversation with different members of the court, is that where are we at on this thing? We're almost a year into this court's tenure trying to figure out how are we going to address this overcrowding issue. And I think we're doing our part. We're trying to get involved. We've got the ombudsman. We've entered into a deal where the bail project's coming in, and I think 83, is that the latest number? 83 have been bonded out through the bail project. So they're doing a work. It's going to take a little bit of time to see what kind of impact that is, to see if we have any significant recidivism or not. Don't know. The ombudsman is developing relationships and doing his job to kind of move things forward. He talked about the ankle monitoring. I think between all of us, we may have decided that was a major medical issue that we had in the jail with a person. But at any rate, we're doing a lot of these things. Our work group, I don't want you to think I'm just sitting around saying, I'm digging my heels in and say, you guys better give me an expansion. You better give me an expansion. That's not what I'm doing. But I think we've gotten to the point that I would really like for you guys to at least consider some portion of that idea that we are going to have to expand to a certain degree. In one area, it's our booking and intake area. we get slammed in that place. You may or may not know, I think our committee knows at least, that we've had to implement policy that we limit the number of people that can be in there at a time. And is it an inconvenience for our law enforcement in the area? It sure is. But I've got to worry about the safety and the security of our facility, the detainees that are in there, and our deputies. So we've implemented that. We are still releasing, in absence of the bail project, in absence of what the ombudsman's doing, still over 200 people a month come in the door and out the door. No bond. They're gone. When I visited with Monique, she was unaware of that fact. She felt like a good number of our people in jail still were misdemeanors. I looked today, there's 18. And they're commits or they're attached to another charge of some type. So we are doing everything humanly possible from a detention standpoint to manage our population. But guys, come January 1 or whenever that fateful day is, if it's 1,500 best case or it's more, we are going to have to figure something out in our booking and intake area. Call it an expansion if you want, that may be what it is, but we have got to have some help in that area. You agreed to a certain degree to that during the budget process when you recognized that those additional personnel were necessary and needed. Well, we could expand on that further. And the other suggestion I have, which is we've talked about the full expansion of the jail, the full-blown for the 20-year plan. We've talked about modular units, temporary modular units to get us through. Now Justice Deakins has been exploring the idea of taking over the old facility. So that's 3 different ideas. This what I'm going to present tonight is really more tagging on to the original idea of expansion. It's part of that plan, but it's a minimum security addition or expansion of where our work release center is. Up to about 200 beds that would allow us time, to figure out this whole mess. But we are stumbling all over each other in that detention center in a variety of ways. We need some relief. I don't know how else to explain it, but we have got to do something. I think this is plainly in your purview to help us with this. How do we get there? I don't know. I don't control dollars. That's part of your job, is to agree or disagree. But I'm imploring you to help us in this venture. I spoke with Monique at length to at least begin these discussions within their work group to see if there's agreement at that level. And then to look down the line on this future expansion, which I still believe is going to happen, but to incorporate within the overall expansion treatment and programs. I think that's got to be part of the future of incarceration, of county jails, prisons, and the whole works. I'm more than willing to do all that, but everything takes money, and it takes a lot of money. I'm going to have Jay come up because I know you guys like to hear numbers and you want to know what this would cost if we did it and all that. So I've asked him to do a little bit of research. Benton County, just so you know, they're getting ready to add a 200 or 250 bed minimum security type facility there. So he's talked to them about what the costs look like for them, what the layout might look like. I also had him contact Mr. Langford, who did the original proposal for Washington County on the existing facility and then on the proposed expansion, of which part of that was intake and booking and an expansion of the work release or minimum security. So Jay can give you some ballpark numbers that aren't too far off, but not just a guess, okay? I don't know where else I was going to go with that, but at any rate, at this point, I'd like for Jay to come up and at least talk to you. Oh, I know what I was going to say, just to kind of close my part of it is, when you talk about the radio system, if you'll recall, I probably killed this whole project at the end of last year because at the last minute, I knew that we had a need from an emergency responders perspective that we were going to have to do something with our radio system. And I begged the judge. I said, Judge, let's put this on with the detention center expansion project, that we could put that out to the people and they would vote on at one day for both of these things. We move on and get them both done and we're done. And to put it frankly, I freaked a bunch of people out, because it was so late in the game. I think it may have been Eva that just kind of fell back in her chair and said, wait a minute, we haven't even had discussion on the radio project, and here we're prepared to vote on the detention thing. So I probably killed that issue unintentionally, but I recognized what the needs are from an emergency services standpoint. And I knew that a radio system is much sexier than a jail. I don't think we'll ever have a problem passing any kind of bond for our radios. My fear is this. If we move forward with a radio project and the citizens vote on that, which they'll pass it, and then we come back at them for an additional issue, a taxing issue, a bond issue, whatever it might be, a year down the road, they're going to go, we just voted on an emergency services item. Why are we doing it again? And I think the handwriting's on the wall and the rest of that. That's just my fear. But at any rate.
I just want to say that the people don't really realize how bad the radio system is. If the jail situation is as bad as the radio system is, they'd vote for all of it tomorrow. Whenever our radio system got bought out and we're just hanging out there on a limb now, we could be without a radio system overnight. It's how critical our radio system is. How important it is to get it done, because it's going to happen, just a matter of time. And your jail situation is the same thing. You're fixing to have a major issue there one of these days, and there's going to be a big attorney in the end of the federal building that's going to run Washington County over the coals really bad someday. It's going to happen if we don't get something done. Thank you.
Thanks, Willie. I don't disagree. I mean, I know that we've got, listen, I'm going to be the biggest user of all the radios, so we've got to have it. I mean, I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm trying to explain why that I put them all together at the end of last year is because I recognized the whole need, but it just caused people too much angst to get anything done, and now here we are a year down the road, and we haven't done either of them. But if you would allow me, Mr. Chairman, I'd like for Jay to come up just to give you an idea, because this will be, from us, proposal number 3, and then if you include what J.P. Deakins is looking at, there's actually 4 laying out there. So, but this is one I think we need to get done. Jay, would you please come forward?
I'll be very brief, Mr. Chairman, because I don't have a ton of information, but I talked to the architect that designed and built the current work release building that we have, and back in 2000, we moved in 05, so he built it in 03, 04 is whenever that construction took place, and he extrapolated the cost of that building out based on inflation. And then it's a 96-bed facility. He said if we double it, we're probably looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 million. So I talked to Benton County, and Benton County said they're trying to get theirs for $3 million, but they didn't have their hard numbers yet. They expected them pretty quick, but he didn't have checked with him today, and he hadn't got any real numbers back from any contractors or any bids yet. So, but they were going to use as much inmate labor as they could to build theirs, and I think that's what they did on their first building. They used a lot of inmate labor. I have not been in their building they built a few years back when Sheriff Ferguson was sheriff. I don't know what the layout is compared to what ours is. So somewhere I'd say between $3 and $5 million is what it's going to cost for a 200-bed minimum security facility.
Justice Fleming.
I think I'd spoke to you about the intake area as well as that. Did you get any numbers on that?
Intake area needs about from 5,000 to 8,000 square feet expansion, and they estimate that at about $400 a square foot. Because that'll be hard jail space, concrete floors, concrete, ceiling, the whole deal.
But I think that part of it's, if not more important than the bed space, isn't it?
Yeah, intake and release is, that's our
and you're fixing to get 1,500 more, so, I mean.
Right, it's not going to improve.
It's coming to the point it's going to have to happen.
Correct, but that's about $400 a square foot from 5 to 8,000.
8,000 square foot?
Between 5 and 8,000 is what they recommended.
$400, okay.
So, there's from 2 to 3.2 million there, and then the
About 8 million.
other expansion. Now, staffing is a whole nother issue that we can talk about another time. Another issue that we'll have to discuss is hardening some part of that minimum security to make it a tornado shelter, because currently we move the people out of that metal building. It's just a pre-engineered metal building with some concrete block walls in it. We move those people over to the hard jail whenever we have a severe storm warning or a tornado warning. But if we get those 100 and another 200, we can't move 300 people over to the hard jail whenever we have a tornado warning. So we'll have to have some room in there. Some way we'll have to harden it up. But that's something we'll talk about if that does come to fruition. But that's kind of where we're at, just preliminary numbers.
Okay, other questions?
But you think,
Justice Deakins.
A couple, I'm sorry, they're not questions, they're more comments, I guess. Is that okay?
That's fine.
I think the more I've gotten into this situation over the past year, the more questions I have than being forced into making a decision. Do you know what I mean? And you guys, like you're saying, it was 11th hour last year. I think we're at the 11th hour this year. So a couple points that bother me. I have been guilty about calling this a crisis. I've used that word, and I now feel like that was not the appropriate word. There's a couple things. When we come up with these ideas, we need to figure out how to fund them. And the automatic thing is to pass a sales tax or to raise the taxes. Number two is, I know we as a jail are holding people we are not required to hold by law. And I think our situation in the county is desperate enough that we need to reevaluate everything we're doing from top to bottom. And then thirdly, I don't want to make a poor decision and rush this through to piggyback off the radio bond. I really don't. And in my mind, those are two separate issues, and I want the voters to have the opportunity to assess those issues separately. So I just want to share those thoughts with some of my colleagues as we, like I'm saying, continue to assess all that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to say more.
Other, Justice Lemming.
The sheriff has, he's got a staff down there that's great big. And if we didn't house Madison County and we didn't house all them people, he'd have to fire them people. And these back and forths, because, honestly, if his staff don't have to be as big if you're not housing that many people. Is that correct or is that not correct?
Well, the jail is, takes just about as many people to run if you've got 500 in there, if you've got 700.
That's what I'm saying.
The efficiencies come with the scale. When you're full, then it's the most efficient, and the least efficient when it's not full, because you take so many people to run a pod, whether it's half full or completely full. So we won't lose very many people or have to get rid of very many people if we lose 200.
But the way I've understood it, with the federal prisoners in the state, there's probably 1.2 million and then 2 million. That's $3.2 million would come out of the sheriff's fund. How's he going to pay his help at the end of the year if you're not getting that money?
Right. That's what
I'm saying. Your overhead's already built, so it's. I know everybody keeps talking about this federal and the state, and we are getting quite a bit of money from them folks. So I just can't see it as. I just have a hard time with that, figuring it out. Thank you.
Justice Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to remind the court that we have commissioned the judge to put out bids for the Washington County Judicial System Study. We haven't even gotten far enough where we've hired anyone to do that study. I believe that study is going to come back showing us a great plethora of data that will help us make decisions using data-based. And I think we forget about that sometimes, that we still have that kind of hanging out there in the shadows, and it hasn't happened yet. So we need to make sure that we're keeping that into consideration. Thank you.
Justice Lemming.
I'm going to say one more thing, and I'm going to be quiet. With that said, we are doing that study, and that's a good thing. But what do you do right now? The problem is right now. Do we get portable pods? What do we do? I mean, we can't just sit here, and if it takes another year to get a study done, and then if the study says, okay, we need the money, so it takes us another 6 months to get it on the ballot for next year. I mean, you're 2 years out. I mean, what do we do? That's a good deal, but what do we do?
Justice Bowman.
Thank you. I'm glad you finally remembered. You know, I've been approached by multiple citizens that said, when are you guys going to get off pod and get the jail built? And that's coming unsolicited from people out here in our community. And I think that's one thing we've ignored so far. We don't hear a lot from people, except a few people come and talk about their perspectives on this thing. We need to get it out there and give the people in the county a chance to voice their opinions. Thank you.
Other comments? We're going to public comment. Thank you, sir.
Just a real quick point of clarification. The sheriff said the jail work group meeting was at the sheriff's office. It's actually here at the courthouse in room 115 this Friday at noon. So
Have you sent a notice on that?
Yes, I'll send a notice out to all JPs so that you have that record.
Some of us can't respond on 24 hours' notice, Sheriff.
Well, yeah, the whole week, it's from now to Friday.
Thank you.
We have a public comment period. It's going to last 12 minutes. Each speaker gets 3 minutes.
Hello, my name is Stephen Ritterbush. I live at 1566 North Corsica inside of Sam Duncan's district. I want to thank the chair and the committee for their time. I also want to thank Sheriff Holder for everything he shared today because it was some fantastic information. Some of it I want to speak to because I have worked as a bail bondsman. I was licensed while I was going through my education, so I paid for my undergraduate degree. So I've seen this system up close, and I've seen a lot of these things that were being discussed today in practice. Bond system, when it got started, the idea was a person would be more likely to come back for their trial if they knew that they could come back and get the money that they had put down for bond. It was the original notion behind it, but then the bail bond system came about, and now people pay roughly 10% or put a lien on something, and they go off on their business, and that doesn't really actually help the jail meet their need for funds necessarily if the person disappears the way it would have before, unless the insurance company manages to come through. And what happens as a result of that is we've got this system where people, generally people who are already low on funds, who need assistance in order to go ahead and go through the bail process in the first place, which is why things like the bail project, the bond project exists. And it's actually the people who are most likely to be at risk, the constituents who are struggling already. And I feel like one of the things that needs to be considered when looking at a situation like this one is whether the bail system is actually helping or hurting the county, because the people who are suffering are ending up losing possibly their jobs. It's not necessarily a positive overall for the constituents, in addition to being a cause of challenge for the county to figure out how to address things like this overpopulation issue. Now, very few of the people in the jail right now actually are misdemeanors, but it's a different situation entirely to say we're not going to write bond and we're just going to say that the people who are dangerous offenders simply can't be bonded, whereas those who aren't are expected to make their court date. I just want to put that out there for consideration as the committee moves forward, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Mac Mayfield. I live at 980 Rocky Lane in Fayetteville, at rural Fayetteville address. JP Deacons, I wanted to follow up on the federal prisoner board days that you mentioned. Have the data going back to 2017. This is January through September. In 2017, it was 9,800. And for the same period, January through September in 2019, it's over 20,000. So it's not just a 30% increase, it's over 100% in 2 years. So I thought I'd share that with you. Thank you.
Next speaker.
can't take your space. Okay, I'll go quick. I have two quick thoughts. My name is Solomon Birchville. I'm a Fayetteville resident. Thank you for your time. First thought is just simply that when populations grow and with the economic growth, there's always an increase in the tax base. And I always get confused when new projects have to be funded through increasing the tax rate instead of paying for it with the current resources that have been growing. If they've been managed properly and future planning has occurred, well, then that's adequate. The growth in the tax base is adequate to meet those kind of needs. That's the first point. My second thing I wanted to raise is I'm honestly just shocked that we're revisiting the conversation about funding a jail expansion already, again, when we had this conversation early in the summer. The key decision makers that can address local criminal justice reforms here are the same ones that have done it in dozens of other counties around our country. And you have to have you've heard the suggestions of the federal prisoner day beds have gone up 100% in 2 years. We should be eager, really passionately interested in how do we reform that. The Ombudsman report laid out 3 things that could alleviate the problems of overcrowding or over-incarceration that we're facing. I wish that there was an enthusiasm on the part of our key decision makers to investigate those, to follow through on those, to find out what the costs and benefits of those those ideas are. Lastly, I want to mention that the groups that can get us more productivity out of our current resources are the executive level policymakers in the local criminal justice system. So not a working group of people who have great ideas and are great people, but executive level policymakers, judges and prosecuting attorneys and public defenders and sheriffs. Like the key decision makers at the table could actually fix these problems with the current resources if that's where the enthusiasm was, instead of only seeing things through this maintenance, facilities management lens and just always needing more and bigger and bigger and bigger jails. Thank you.
How much time we got?
6 minutes.
Next speaker.
Gladys Tiffany from Fayetteville. And I really want to thank Justice Jenkins for reminding us about that study that must be done. I really do want to emphasize how very important it is that we make our decisions on real evidence that we can actually look at and with options available to really make some of those decisions, because there are so many options that are happening out there in the world that we do not yet know how to apply within our context. But I think some of these people, and I hope that you all have seen the proposals that have been coming in, that they're very interesting groups that are preparing to actually do that study, and they're not planning on taking forever to do that. I think it takes a few months, but let's get it started and let's do it as soon as we can, because it needs to happen and we need that information very badly.
Thank you. Next speaker.
I'm Beth Koger from Fayetteville. I just want to mention a couple of things. Tonight, some of the people on the court and other people have said we have had questions that we don't know the answers to. The Criminal Justice Assessment Study will help us get those answers, and it'll be from experts in that field. And I think we need, like everybody said, we need to wait on that. Another thing I'd like to mention is, and I sent emails on this, I don't know if everyone's read them or not, but also for the public. The Arkansas Crime Information Center, their statistics are out for 2018, and in Washington County, there was a decrease in the total offenses of by major category from 2017 to 2018. It's 790. It's true, that's not a lot, but it's on a downward trend, and that's what we've been looking for. And that was before we started all the other actions that we've taken this year. And when, I don't remember who said it, someone said, it's been a year and we haven't done anything. I don't think that's right. I think we've done a lot this year. The court's done a lot. The prosecutor, the public defender, the judges, everyone, we're all working on this together, and it's going to take all of us. So I don't want to just dismiss those things that we have done. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Madeline Porta. I'm a Fayetteville resident. I just wanted to echo some of the things that have been brought up, and especially around policy and practice and things that are happening in the courts and in the jails. And I do think that it's really important, if you do get a chance to go to court and watch what's happening, both going to the 8.1 hearings that are held at the jail, and also to court appearances, to just kind of see what's happening, see what people are being charged with, see what kind of bond people are in on for what kinds of charges. I do want to bring up that there is a practice here in Washington County of setting at least $50,000 bond if a person misses a court date, so for a failure to appear charge, and that's at least. I've seen people in on $300,000 bond, $500,000 bond with the charges of failure to appear. So most people don't have access to $5,000 cash to get released for an FTA charge, and people sit in. And I just really do want to echo what Mr. Edelman said as well about the adjourn dates, where people who are incarcerated pre-trial, having not been convicted of anything, their adjourn dates are 3 months out, just the same as a person who is out. Either they were released on their own recognizance or they're out on bond. And having a new practice or policy of adjourning those cases where the person is in trial or in jail pre-trial for no longer than 3 weeks. Or a month at the longest, or even 2 weeks, would speed up the process of these cases. And I think that's what Mr. Edelman was talking about when talking about processing. And I'm also interested in sentences, and I don't have any answers to those, whether sentences are excessive, but I do want to just note that if somebody is sitting in jail pre-trial for a longer amount of time, even if they plead guilty and get time served, the effect will have been that they have been incarcerated for X amount of time, even if they plead guilty and they are sentenced to time served and are released at that time. So the sentence may be no jail, however, they sat in jail for 10 months waiting to get to that point. So I just wanted to point out those things. I do think that it's incredibly important to be reevaluating the system as a whole and looking at things, and I really, really appreciate the conversations going on, and I think that there are a lot of things that can be done in terms of policy and practice right now. So, thanks so much.
Thank you for your comments. Without objection, this meeting's adjourned.